Hers is not a household name.
Demri Lara.
In fact, most of you have never heard of Demri Lara Parrott. The few of you who have are likely fans of Seattle grunge music, specifically Allison Chains. Demri was once engaged to Allison Chains singer Layne Stayley before she, and then he, succumbed to their addictions. For those who know the name Demri Parrott, she is a source of endless inspiration, the ultimate rock star girlfriend, tragic tale of stardom and stardust and stargazing. And woe to those who view her instead as a footnote to someone else's story. Demri is not your morphine muse. She is not just a photograph in a montage of pretty girls with wasted eyes. She is not a sea creature of sorrow or an almost bride of bitter fruit. She is not heroin chic or whatever nomenclature you wish to give to those of great beauty who struggle with addiction. She was born Demri Lara Parrott on February 22, 1969, in Bremerton, Washington, in Kitsap County. Her ancestry reveals Irish, Scottish, Welsh, English, Swiss, German, and Cherokee heritage. She never knew her biological father, Dennis Doherty, until she was in her 20s. At the time of her birth, her mother Kathleen was married to a man named Stephen Parrott, who adopted baby Demri. Kathleen and Stephen then divorced, and Kathleen gave birth to a son named Devin, and later when Kathleen married a man named Dennis Murphy, she had 2 more sons, Derek and David. Dennis Murphy also adopted Demri, who alternately used the surnames Parrott and Murphy during her teens. Demri attended Arlington and Lakewood high schools in Washington, and briefly the Douglas Anderson School of the Arts in Jacksonville, Florida. She was known as one of the most popular girls, bright and effervescent. She did some teen modeling at the time and was passionate about theater, philosophy, and poetry. At the end of high school, she moved to Seattle to take advantage of the opportunities of the big city. She was working at a clothing store called Saturdays in 1988 when she met Layne Stayley, 19-year-old singer of the fledgling hard rock band Alice in Chains. Layne had previously been lead singer of the glam metal band Sleaze. Contrary to rumors, Demri likely was not the one who introduced Layne to heroin. Longtime friends of hers have denied that she ever used the substance prior to meeting her boyfriend. What was true, however, was that Demri was more popular than Layne at the beginning of their relationship. Everywhere she went, people knew the petite and pretty Miss Parrott. Demri was not only beautiful, but she loved her body and loved showing it off. Her raison d'etre arriving at parties was to strip off her blouse and spend the night semi-nude. She was also bisexual at a time when not many people flaunted their open sexuality, certainly not in the rock and roll crowd of that era. She was an artist in her own right, with a passion for angels and florals and decoupage. She modeled for several women's clothing stores and made everything look beautiful on her and around her. But as Alice in Chains' popularity rose and Layne's familiarity among fans grew, Demri's star began to wane. This hurt her. She was used to being the shining star and suddenly felt eclipsed. The fact that it was the man she loved eclipsing her meant trying to subdue those envious feelings, but she was not always successful. Perhaps this is when her dabbling in heroin began to control her. Then grunge went global, and Layne began touring nationally and internationally with Alice in Chains. Demri often complained that good friends forgot about her during those weeks with her boyfriend away, and only called again when Layne arrived back in the Emerald City. The fact that she heard credible rumors about her boyfriend hooking up with girls on the road didn't help, and it is alleged that she had a few affairs as well during those times they were estranged, to ease her loneliness. It did not, however, help. And yet they loved each other and got engaged in 1992. He gave her an Irish claddagh ring. But that happy moment, picking out a wedding dress and booking a chapel, was soon followed by a dark and dangerously quick descent into heavy addiction for both Layne and Demri. Their opiate addiction began to consume them, and at the urging of his bandmates and management, the duo checked into rehab at the Pasadena Recovery Center. This photo of Demri with Jane's addiction Dave Navarro was taken during that stint. They got clean, Demri and Layne, yet no sooner were they home but the spiral began again. When it was clear that each was harming the other's chances at sobriety, they ended their engagement and broke up. But they could not rip themselves from each other entirely. She would call. He would use. She would beg. He would help. She would promise. He would pay. Rehab after rehab for one or both of them. They renewed their relationship, but not the engagement. And then they broke up for good. And still they could not stay away. In 1993, Demri was dating a woman named Roisin, a fellow addict. Demri had stolen from her family to feed her addictions. She continued to model, mostly with photographer Jack Plasky, whose photos you see here, and she began working as an escort. She was arrested several times for solicitation. In 1994, Demri was diagnosed with endocarditis as a result of needle sickness, where cotton enters the bloodstream via syringe, causing bacteria to infect the heart. To save her life, she had valve replacement surgery and a pacemaker installed. She loved the hospital staff at Evergreen in Kirkland, Washington, but was crestfallen the day when, during her recovery, she saw people coming to visit and realized Layne was there too, and they were only there to see him, the rock star, the one she loved but could not save and could not be saved by. Her hero, heroine. She was unable to stay clean despite the life-saving measures taken. In October 1996, after years of heartbreak and heroin addiction and months of intermittent homelessness, Demri was living with an older man in Seattle. Her long hair was cropped short, and she needed a fix. Something went wrong. She began feeling sick, very sick and very weak. Her roommate got her into the car and began driving her to the hospital. "No," she whispered, "not that hospital. Take me where my surgery was." And so they made the hour-long drive to Evergreen, where she was admitted. It was too late for Demri. She was not dead. She was in a coma. For the next 24 hours, Kathleen and her sister, Demri's aunt, sat by this beautiful girl's bed. And then they told the hospital staff to turn the machines off. Demri passed like a star in the night. When Layne learned she was gone, he broke down. He had failed her. She had failed him. They had failed together and apart. He asked for the teddy bear he gave her the day he proposed and gave her the claddagh. He also adopted her cat, Sadie. And then she was buried at the cemetery beside the chapel where they were to have been married. Layne lived another 5.5 years after Demri passed, but in an altered kind of half-life. He spent his royalties on drugs and locked himself away in a high-rise apartment building, shutting the world out. He could no longer sing, as drugs robbed him of several of his teeth. The last photo taken of him was after his niece was born, his last year of life. and Alice in Chains fans likely wouldn't recognize him. Nobody knew that he had passed until 3 weeks after his overdose, when the bank notified his management that he'd stopped withdrawing cash. 2 stars, 1 orbit, 1 love, 2 lives, 2 stories, 1 enduring legacy. Their stories are about much more than addiction and very little really to do with fame. Music and myth and monsters and muse. To be a proper muse, one isn't just beautiful and gives ideas to an artist. They are possessed of their own unique genius. Many muses are themselves artists and creators. Glimpses of Demri Lara Parrott in song lyrics hint at nothing of the real woman other than the torment felt by the man she loved who wrote those songs. She is not the girl on the cover of Dirt, but the girl on that album cover bears a striking resemblance to the real Demri Lara Parrott. Not her, and not your morphine muse.